Rome did not crucify Jesus in secret. It did not hide the cross behind palace walls. It did not treat execution as a private matter. It placed condemned men where people could see them, where travelers could pass by, where fear could spread faster than any official decree. The cross was not only an instrument of death, it was a message. And in the case of Jesus, that message became one of the most disturbing reversals in human history. Rome used the cross to erase men. But the cross did not erase Jesus. It made his name impossible to bury. To understand why this story still unsettles the world, we have to look at it without soft colors, without comfortable religious decoration, and without pretending the scene was clean. The crucifixion of Jesus was not peaceful. It was not gentle. It was not symbolic to the men who ordered it. It was Roman punishment, public punishment, political punishment. A death designed to humiliate the body, break the spirit, and warn the crowd. And that is where the file begins. Jerusalem was not just a sacred city, it was a pressured city. It carried prayers, songs, sacrifices, arguments, memories, and old wounds. It was filled with people who believed their history was not random, that their God had acted before, that empires could rise and fall, and that judgment did not belong only to kings. But Rome did not rule through spiritual imagination. Rome ruled through roads, taxes, soldiers, governors, prisons, courts, and crosses. The empire could tolerate many local customs. It could allow temples to stand. It could allow priests to perform rituals. It could allow people to speak of God as long as the order of Rome was not threatened. But once a crowd became unstable, once a preacher became too visible, once the language of kingdom began to sound dangerous, Rome stopped listening like a philosopher and started acting like an empire. Jesus entered that world, not as a Roman general, not as a rebel commander, not as a man surrounded by weapons. That is part of what makes the story more haunting. He did not look like the kind of enemy Rome usually feared. He had no army capable of marching against Caesar. He had no fortress. He had no coins with his face on them. He commanded no legion. And yet, around him something moved. People gathered. The sick came near. The poor listened. Religious leaders watched. Crowds began to speak. Some saw a teacher, some saw a prophet, some saw danger, some saw hope, some saw blasphemy, some saw a king. And to Rome, that last word was enough to make the air colder. King got a. In an empire, that word was never innocent. A kingdom could be spiritual in the mouth of a preacher, but in the ears of a governor, it could become a threat. Rome did not have to understand every theological debate in Jerusalem. It only had to understand one thing. Unrest was expensive, and rebellion was contagious. The Roman file on Jesus would not have been written like a gospel. It would not have cared about healing. It would not have trembled before parables. It would not have paused over mercy. It would have looked for risk, crowds, guns, influence, timing, public tension, accusations, the possibility that one man could become a symbol. That was enough. Empires are not only afraid of armies, they are afraid of symbols they cannot control. A man can be killed, a symbol can escape. Before the cross, there was the city. Jerusalem moved under the weight of sacred expectation. Its temple was not merely a building. It was the center of worship, memory, identity, and dispute. Every stone seemed to hold a history larger than the people walking past it. Jesus moved through that atmosphere with words that did not stay harmless. He spoke in ways that exposed hypocrisy. He told stories that reversed expectations. He confronted religious pride. He spoke of a kingdom not built like Rome, not defended like Rome, not measured like Rome. That kind of kingdom sounded weak to the powerful. But weakness can become dangerous when people start believing it. The empire understood fear. It understood command. It understood punishment. It understood what bodies looked like when authority was finished with them. But Jesus spoke as if the final word did not belong to those who could kill. That is what made the situation darker. The cross was built for men who had been stripped of control. It was built to make the condemned person into a warning sign. It took a human being and turned him into a public announcement. This is what power can do. Rome did not invent suffering, but Rome organized it. Its punishments could be legal, procedural, and brutal at the same time. A governor could make a decision, soldiers could carry it out, crowds could watch, and the machinery of the empire could continue moving as if nothing sacred had been touched. This is one of the most disturbing parts of the story. Evil does not always look chaotic. Sometimes it looks administrative. A question is asked. A sentence is considered. A crowd shouts. A prisoner is handed over. Soldiers receive instructions. Wood is prepared. A body is taken away. And everyone with authority tells himself that this is just how order is maintained. The execution of Jesus sits inside that machinery. The gospel accounts present a world of accusation, pressure, interrogation, mockery, and silence. They show a man surrounded by voices demanding an outcome, while the people with power move between hesitation and calculation. Pilate was not a priest. He was not there to resolve the deepest questions of Israel's faith. He was there as Rome's representative. His task was not to understand the soul. His task was to keep the province under control. That matters. Because the death of Jesus was not only about religious accusation, it became entangled with imperial order. A man called king could not be treated lightly. The title placed over the crucified body was not decoration. It was accusation and warning. Rome knew how to mock the claims of the condemned. It could take the language of kingship and nail it above a dying man as if to say, "This is what becomes of kings who do not belong to Rome." The empire did not need to believe Jesus was truly dangerous in the way a military leader was dangerous. It only needed the risk to be inconvenient. That is how many dark decisions happen. Not because everyone involved believes the victim deserves the worst, but because silence is easier. Because order is easier. Because one man can be sacrificed to calm a crowd. Because a governor can wash his hands of a decision and still let the decision happen. Because a system can destroy someone while pretending no one person is fully responsible. The road to the cross was not only a road of pain, it was a road of exposure. Jesus was exposed to mockery, exposed to soldiers, exposed to the public, exposed to the machinery of a world that knew how to make suffering visible. Crucifixion was designed to remove dignity before it removed life. It raised the condemned high enough to be seen, but not high enough to be honored. It placed the body between earth and sky, suspended in shame, turned into a spectacle for strangers, enemies, mourners, and passers-by. There are many ways to kill a man. Rome chose the way that spoke loudest. That is why the cross became Rome's language of terror. A sword could be quick. A prison could be hidden. But a cross could preach fear without using words. It told the crowd that the empire had time. It told them that punishment could be slow. It told them that resistance would not end in glory. It told them that Rome could take a person's name, body, voice, and future, and display the ruins to anyone who doubted its power. But with Jesus, something went wrong with the message. Rome wanted the cross to say, "This is the end." The memory of Jesus made it say something else. To the first witnesses, this was not a clean religious image. It was grief, confusion, terror, the collapse of hope, the kind of event that forces people to ask whether they had misunderstood everything. The crowds that had listened were now watching from a distance, or disappearing into fear. Those who loved him had to face the horror of seeing the person they followed reduced to public suffering. Mary's presence near the story makes the darkness more human, not as decoration, not as soft devotional imagery, but as the unbearable truth that execution is never only about the condemned. It reaches mothers, friends, followers, and anyone who had dared to hope. The empire kills one body, but the wound spreads through many lives. That is another thing Rome understood. Public punishment was meant to educate the living. The dead could no longer rebel, the living could. So Rome made the living watch. It wanted memory to serve fear. But memory is dangerous. Memory does not always obey the empire. The earliest followers of Jesus did not preserve the cross as a Roman success. They preserved it as the center of a mystery. Not because it was easy to look at, but because it was impossible to forget. They looked at the place of shame and saw judgment against the world's violence. They looked at the condemned man and saw innocence standing before power. They looked at the instrument of terror and saw it transformed into the sign Rome could not control. This is why the crucifixion remains disturbing even for people who have seen crosses all their lives. The image has become familiar. Too familiar. It hangs in churches. It appears in art. It is worn around necks. It is carved into stone. It is printed on books. It is placed above altars. It becomes so common that the original horror almost disappears. But the original cross was not jewelry. It was not architecture. It was not a quiet religious emblem. It was an execution device. And the central claim of Christianity is that God allowed the story of salvation to pass through something that looked like defeat, humiliation, abandonment, and state violence. That is not a simple idea. It is terrifying. It says that the sacred did not avoid the place of human cruelty. It entered it. It says that divine meaning can appear where political power sees only a disposable body. It says that the empire can pronounce a sentence and still fail to understand the event it has unleashed. The darkness around the death of Jesus is not only physical, it is moral. The story forces uncomfortable questions. How many people knew something was wrong and stayed silent? How many were afraid of the crowd? How many chose survival over truth? How many treated innocence as negotiable? How many washed their hands while still allowing blood to be spilled? These questions are not trapped in the past. That is why the file stays open. Rome is gone as an ancient empire, but the logic of Rome is not gone. The logic of power protecting itself still exists. The logic of public humiliation still exists. The logic of making examples out of people still exists. The logic of sacrificing truth to preserve order still exists. That is why the Roman file on Jesus does not read like an old case that has been closed forever. It reads like a pattern. A man stands before systems larger than himself. The systems ask whether he is useful, dangerous, embarrassing, or disposable. The crowd becomes part of the pressure. The officials look for a way to survive the moment, and the truth is treated as something that can be managed. In that world, the cross becomes more than wood. It becomes the place where human power shows its face. Not the face it uses in speeches. The face it uses when challenged. Rome could build roads, govern territories, command armies, and shape history. It could create order over vast distances. It could make its presence felt from palaces to remote villages. But when threatened, Rome also knew how to make terror public. The crucifixion of Jesus stands inside that contradiction. Civilization and brutality. Law and violence. Order and cruelty. Procedure and injustice. This is why a serious look at the cross cannot be sentimental. The story is too dark for that. The man at the center of it had spoken of mercy, forgiveness, repentance, hypocrisy, judgment, and a kingdom not built by the rules of empire. He had touched those others avoided. He had challenged those who were comfortable with religious appearance. He had drawn the desperate close enough to create movement. Then the movement was brought under the shadow of Rome. And Rome answered in the language it knew best. The cross. There is a reason ancient execution places were not meant to feel sacred. They were meant to feel final. They were meant to teach the crowd that the condemned person had been rejected by power, exposed to shame, and removed from the world of the living. Yet the story of Jesus does something that empires fear most. It turns the place of rejection into the place of remembrance. The empire wanted the cross to reduce him. Instead, the cross forced every generation after him to ask why this death mattered. Why did this man among thousands executed by Rome become the one whose death still divides history? Why did a method designed for shame become the central symbol of faith for millions? Why did the empire's warning become the church's proclamation? Those questions are not small. They are the reason the Roman file cannot be read as a simple execution report. The facts are severe enough. A man was accused. A governor judged. Soldiers mocked. Crowds watched. A cross was raised. A body suffered. A mother grieved. Followers scattered. Power seemed to win. But the memory did not die. And that is the part Rome could not command. An empire can control a province. It can control a sentence. It can control soldiers. It can control the road to execution. It can control the wood, the nails, the guard, the sign, the body. But it cannot always control what the event will mean once the witnesses begin to speak. The cross escaped Rome. Not physically. Historically. Spiritually. Symbolically. It moved from a place of imperial terror into the deepest memory of Christian faith. And that transformation is one of the strangest reversals in religious history. The thing designed to silence Jesus became the thing through which his story was carried across languages, empires, oceans, and centuries. That does not make the cross less dark. It makes it more powerful. Because the darkness was not erased. It was confronted. The suffering was not denied. It was remembered. The violence was not hidden. It was placed at the center. That is why the cross still disturbs. It tells the truth about what humans can do when fear, religion, politics, and power collapse into one violent moment. It tells the truth about crowds. It tells the truth about governments. It tells the truth about religious leaders who protect position over righteousness. It tells the truth about followers who think they are brave until danger arrives. It tells the truth about suffering that looks meaningless while it is happening. And for believers, it tells the truth about a God who enters the wound rather than watching from a distance. This is not comfortable. It was never meant to be. The modern world often wants a harmless Jesus, a gentle figure with no blood, no trial, no empire, no accusation, no public death, no political danger, no terrifying cross. But the biblical story does not allow that version to stand alone. The Jesus of the Gospels walks toward a real confrontation with real powers. His death is not staged in a dreamlike place outside history. It happens under a governor, under an empire, near a city, before witnesses, inside the brutal logic of Roman rule. That is why the setting matters. Take Rome out of the story, and the cross becomes abstract. Put Rome back in, and the story becomes sharper. The cross was not just a religious symbol waiting to be interpreted. It was Rome's weapon. It was the empire's public signature. And Jesus was placed under that signature. Disturbing question is not only why Rome killed him. The deeper question is why Rome failed to erase him. Ancient Rome left behind ruins, monuments, broken columns, and the memory of power. Its roads cracked. Its emperors died. Its legions vanished. Its gods lost their temples. Its courts fell silent. But the man it crucified remained. Not as Rome intended. Not as a warning against resistance. Not as a forgotten body outside Jerusalem. But as the center of a story Rome could not finish. That is the final irony in the file. The empire wanted the cross to be the last word. It became the beginning of something Rome could not contain. A condemned man became a remembered lord. A Roman execution became a sacred wound. A public humiliation became a symbol carried by the very people Rome once tried to intimidate. And the cross, built to terrify, became the sign that even the most brutal power on earth does not always control the meaning of what it does. This is why the Roman file on Jesus remains open. Because the question is not only what Rome did to him. The question is what his death revealed about Rome, about humanity, about power, about fear. And about the strange possibility that the darkest place in history can become the place where the empire loses its final claim. Rome raised the cross to end the story. But the story did not end there. It was only the first page of the file.